Welcome to the Future You YouTube sessions.
Today's guest is Rachel de Thample, who has worked in the kitchens of Marco Pierre White, Heston Blumenthal, and Peter Gordon. She is the author of Less Meat, More Veg, 5, and is just writing her 6th book. She served as commissioning editor of Waitrose Food Illustrated and head of the Food for Pioneering Organic Box Scheme, Abel Cole. She teaches fermentation both at the River Cottage and Petersham Nurseries, and is the academic director of the Natural Chef Diploma course at the College of Natural Medicine. So thank you, Rachel, for joining me.
Pleasure.
So you have such an interesting career to date. When did you start your career in food and hospitality?
Oh, good question. And well, I went to university in America, in Boston, and then where I studied journalism. And I wanted initially, as my career path was to be a war correspondent, actually, and I wanted to work for the BBC. And I came to London when I was 22, fresh out of university. And I didn't really want to go to the Midlands or somewhere else to be which is the normal path. You can't, I mean, it's very difficult as a fresh out of university foreigner. So I'm from America, to step into a reporting job as a foreign correspondent for the BBC. I was a bit arrogant, I think, and naive maybe. Well, I realized I sort of thought it would be wise to have a focus on what I was writing about, because if you don't, you end up down avenues, maybe specializing in something you don't want to. So I thought food's always been a massive passion of mine. And I mean, I think it's weird saying that, because it's almost saying, eating is part of my day, because food, in my mind, food should be a passion for everybody. It should just be innate. But I think some people have a deeper connection to it. And my family have a really sort of rich culinary enthusiasm and passion. And my grandparents grew and pickled. And so I have that amazing foundation that was just there. It wasn't trendy or something, that they weren't trying to be hipsters at all. They were just doing what was natural and part of a rhythm of life. So I was really lucky. I used to go to farmers markets, when I was a kid. It wasn't a trendy thing. It was just, we got vegetables from the local local growers. And then I came to London, and I just was, I was disconnected suddenly from homegrown food and from ferments and preserves. And I just saw all the, strawberries on Oxford Street in the winter, and just thought, where's all this stuff coming from? And it really engaged me with food, because it was funny, because I was disengaged from food. And then that made me more aware that what I had as a growing up was not common in the wider world outside of my little family bubble. So that was really what steered me in the food direction.
Yeah, so it's interesting how you, as part of who you were, and you didn't know that, it was just ingrained in you as a child. I love that. Yeah. And it just got ignited, it sounded like, over the years.
It's weird, because the older I get, I just think, wow, I've had this all along, and I had no idea. It was just there. My granny used to ferment loads of stuff.
Oh, really?
And I never asked her to learn how, and she never taught me, because she just kind of did it in her sleep. And you would ask her, I did ask her for some recipes, and she said, I don't know. I just do it. And I was like, okay, that's not very helpful, Granny. But I didn't really start asking her for recipes until, she was much older, right before she died. But luckily I did do that. And I have some of her old recipes, her old sourdough recipe, which funny enough, does have yeast, added commercial yeast in it. I'm like, no. Really? But I have her sauerkraut recipes and her fermented pickles and now, but I wish I would have been by her side, making them as a child. But I did eat a lot of them. So I've been nourished completely up from the inside.
Yeah, you have a healthy gut bacteria from the early days.
Exactly.
And so you've worked with some amazing chefs.
Yeah.
So how did that come about?
It's funny. When I decided to work in food, I was editing an online magazine, and I decided to go into food, and I went to work initially as a copywriter for a PR agency that looked after food and drink and restaurant clients. And when I was there, I met a chef called Curtis Stone. He's massive in America, and he's from Australia, and he's very successful in the States, and he was the head chef at Quo Vadis at the time in Soho. And I just asked him if I just felt like I needed some credentials to get into food writing, because I was writing, like press releases and press materials, and I wanted to, work for a magazine. And so I thought, well, if I work in a restaurant and get some proper skills, and I thought of, at the time, there weren't a lot of women chefs, and it was when was it? It was early 2000s, so like 2002. And I just thought, well, let me have a go at this chefing thing. And I loved it at the start. And so after the first week, because that we kind of didn't have an agreement, he just said, come in, see what happens. Yep. And so I did a week or two, and he said, Rachel, like, what are you doing? And I was like, I love it. This is amazing. I want to stay. So I gave up my PR job, which was a massive contrast, because it was, restaurant launches, and we looked after Zuma and the Cinnamon Club, and it was like all champagne and glamour. And then I was in a basement kitchen working 16-hour days, earning half the money, cleaning stoves at 1 a.m. And I just thought, and at the start it was really glitzy, and then the novelty quickly wore off. But the experience was amazing. And I did get to a point though where I was, apparently I was told later that the chefs were like, basically had bets on who could break me. Oh, wow. And they did, but luckily I had put the ball in motion to go to try other kitchens, and I thought, I don't want to give up on this, because I don't like giving up on things, and I quite like being challenged and pushed. I thought, if I could work with any chef, who would I work with? And Heston Blumenthal had actually come into Quevolis and eaten lunch there one day, and we found out after he had left that he had been in. And so we actually, this is so funny, we dug through the bin to find out which table he was on, what he had eaten, who had made his food. And so I actually had been to the Riverside Brasserie, which he was, so not the one the Rue brothers had, but he had another brasserie that was a bit like the, my brain's completely gone, but he has a pub next to the Fat Duck, at least he did. So it was more like that. It was more like accessible foods. And I went there and had triple cooked chips. I had steak with bone marrow, and I had some of his early classics. And I was completely like knocked sideways, because it was stuff I was familiar and had before, but the way his approach was really phenomenal. And I'd been reading about him, and he was at 2 Michelin stars at the time, so it was right before his 3rd star. And I wrote him, and I just wrote like a real like proper letter with a pencil or pen and paper, and posted it like we don't do anymore. And I really didn't think I would get a reply. I just thought, why not? Like, aim for the stars and hit the moon. And I got a reply, and Ashley Palmer Watts, his head chef, wrote to me and said, we're looking for, a commis chef, come and have a go. And I actually wrote back and said, I'm not qualified. I don't think I'm qualified, but and I don't know what I was thinking when I wrote to him. But anyway, I did go in, and I went for the job and was offered the job, and, and got to know Heston a bit. I mean, Heston's really generous with his time and his knowledge. He's really amazing, actually. And I think what he's done is brilliant. And he just layers everything with so much, playfulness and history and knowledge. Nothing's not thought out for a long time. It's so multi-layered, and it's so fun being in the restaurant. It's like, I'm really lucky. I've eaten there as a diner, many times, and it's like going to a play that you can eat, which is even better. I try to take elements of that, but in a probably slightly more Jamie Oliver way, where it's really simple and approachable and quick and easy. And I really have that as a kind of, it took me a while to kind of hone my style, because I've worked with different chefs. So I worked in the kind of Marco Pierre White stable, which was very kind of traditional French brasserie style, really. A lot of French, like everyone spoke French in the kitchen. So if they're walking with a hot pan, they would say show, and there was everything was in French. And then I worked with Peter Gordon at the Providores, and he was all about ingredients and really fun, exciting flavor combinations, but really simple. Right. I mean, I would say that simple to prepare to a degree. Some people might disagree, but quite accessible. But what was always exciting is he would just put like Turkish pistachios with miso, and you're like, oh wait, this is Turkish and this is Japanese, and I've never had that together. And what's great is you read that on the menu and your brain can't register how that could possibly take. So try to take elements of that into the food, my recipe writing style. And it's nice when people latch onto it. Sometimes it's just there and, people don't dissect the sort of multi-layers behind it. But it's nice when people do. It's like secret codes or something.
Yeah, well, so it's great you've had such a diverse sort of background to sort of draw from.
And it just kind of happened. I just kind of went to places that interest me and didn't think about how they would fit together. And if on paper they don't fit together at all, they're really like quite different and varied, but I've managed to kind of distill that into something which that to me makes sense, at least.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think it does filter through, especially in your current book, which we'll talk about a bit later on. You definitely get that sense that you've sort of combined different techniques and you're really challenging, like, for example, the cheesecake with Kombucha. And you just think, what? That's really intriguing. And I'm just desperate to try that out. So
you should. It's so great.
Yeah, I can't wait. But I just think, my head can't put that together. And I find that really challenging. So I'm looking forward to that. In fact, it's also good for you, which is even better.
I know, exactly.
Like an extra bonus.
3 slices of it.
Yeah, exactly. Don't have to feel guilty about that one. I love that. So you've written quite a few books. My favourite, I must say, is the tonic and teas.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you can have a drink and it's tasty but also nurturing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just nurturing on the inside, but also you can create a moment around it too. Yeah. And I collaborated with actually Kira Jean Roberts. So she's been a nutritional therapist for me over the years, and also she's my yoga teacher now too. And I love the fact I've used her for both, because actually they are interconnected. And when I first went to see her, I was just feeling a bit, worn out, and I gave her my diet plan. And I'm really health conscious. I fast most days. I eat probably 10 to 15 portions of fruit and vegetables. I eat organic. I do drink coffee occasionally. I've stopped, so I haven't had coffee for a couple of weeks. I haven't been drinking. I feel like I'm on a purist streak at the moment. This is not completely normal, but I'm really conscious of my health. When I went to see her, I gave her this pretty, good report on my diet. I probably left off some of the chocolate or something. But the thing she asked me about was, are you sleeping and are you stressed? And I was like, oh, that's why I feel so rubbish. It wasn't my food, it was that. And I think what's interesting about the teas and tonics is you can, a lot of them sort of address this sort of parasympathetic nervous system and can calm you just with the internal aspect, of consuming them. But I think the ritual, and Kira actually puts this in the intro that she's done in the book, is it's that ritual, it's that taking the time to make the tea. It's like taking yourself away from, usually, away from your computer in the morning, or building that into your day, to sit and drink a cup of tea and not do anything else. Don't look at your phone, just don't look at your computer. I think everyone could spare 5 minutes, and we waste a lot of time, and I'm totally guilty of it, just scrolling through. I love Instagram but we can just get lost in these things, and then we don't actually nurture ourselves enough. And I think just taking that 5 minutes for tea, it's much faster than making a meal. And it can just have so many multi-layered benefits to it.
Nice to take a bit of time out. We're all so busy, aren't we? Always so busy.
Yeah, exactly. It's really important to have those sort of quiet, still moments. So yeah, I've been doing a lot more of that. So I've been drinking loads of teas and tonics as well as a result.
What's your personal favorite?
My favorite, actually, I was going to say, I have to think, but actually I do have one that is the one I make all the time. And if I don't take it frequently, I notice a difference. It's a bedtime tea. I can't think what it's called. I think it's called bedtime tea, but it has chamomile, nutmeg, and lavender. So really classic bedtime, but with the nutmeg is what makes it slightly different. Nutmeg's really relaxing and calming and has the most fantastic flavor, and the combination is just really lovely. And so I usually have, like, I go to Neil's Yard Remedies to buy a lot of my dried, their stuff is such good quality, and buy my chamomile, my lavender. So I have like lovely little jars of it, and I have a little nutmeg grater, and that's my favorite bedtime tea. And I also love, I have my green tea here. I love sencha. And I like it so much, sometimes I can overconsume it. And I think I'm not drinking coffee, so I'll have 10 pots of sencha instead, and that's not healthy. So I have a tea in the book called the Grasshopper Tea, and it's basically adding some mint, so it's diluting it, and then it gives this sort of more, because green tea can actually irritate some people's guts, especially if you have it on an empty stomach. And I do sort of intermittent fasting, so when I'm having it on an empty stomach, that mint gives it a calming effect too, and it's just more refreshing, especially if you're having it later in the day. It's a good way of balancing it, and so it's having what you like, but giving it, a bit of balance.
Yeah, that's good that you mentioned balance. Actually, that's quite important in your day, isn't it? Having balance.
Yeah, on all aspects. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, is there a difference between a tea and a tonic?
Yes. Yes and no. Just to throw a spanner in. But yeah, I mean, a tea is actually, technically speaking. So I would say tisanes and tonics can overlap, because a tonic is a drink that is made purely for its health benefit. So it is a health focused drink. So it's a drink that's made to cure something, or to, alleviate some symptoms, or to address a health issue. A tisane is a herbal concoction. So it's a hot brew made with herbs or spices. But a tea is Camellia sinensis, which is the tea leaf. So that is the technical leaf. The herbal teas and tisanes are the same thing, but they get called tea. So actually, technically speaking, tea is made with Camellia sinensis, and then a tisane is something herbal or spices. And I have a mixture in the tea chapter. Actually, I think it's the French. Do I have it behind me? Yeah, I have the French version of my book. They actually put tisanes. This book's done really well in France, but they've actually put tisanes on the title.
Oh, wow.
So it's teas, tisanes, and tonifin nuts.
All right. Yeah. Oh, that's so sweet.
They've actually put tisanes on the French cover. But you can have overlap. And when I said there's overlap between the tisanes and the tonics, is if you're concocting like a mixture of herbs, like the bedtime tea that I have, it's very focused around calming you before bedtime and getting you in a really relaxed state. And it does make a big difference, that tea. I really love it.
Yeah, I find
bath after a long day.
Yeah, another nice ritual.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is one of my rituals.
Yeah, I've been getting into Tulsi tea. The holy oil. I love that now. I have that before bed just to help me sleep.
It's great because I find that some of these you can form a healthy addiction to. I mean, anything in overconsumption that's good for you. If you have something that's good for you in small quantity, you overconsume it, it's bad. But I find it's interesting where you actually crave things. Like, for an instance, I crave spirulina, and it took me about 3 years to actually like the taste. I still call it pond scum, but actually I really crave it. And if I don't have it in a week's period, I feel like I'm off balance. I feel like something's missing from my diet. And it's because I'm craving it because it's good for me, which is great, because we do often crave things that are not good for us. And so it's great when you can start craving things that are positive for you. And there's a lot of the recipes in the book I do genuinely crave. Like there's wheatgrass as well. I haven't had it for ages. I've grown my own in the past, but wheatgrass is amazing. And actually it's coming to, this is a really good recipe because it'll still be relevant just as this comes out, but gooseberries and wheatgrass juiced together, if you can get your hands on both of them, is really a strange combination that works really well. It's delicious.
And you just blend it too, or how do you make it?
I put it through the juicer, but you could blend it with a little bit of water and then strain it through a sieve. So that's another way of doing it, but it's really fantastic. I love it. It's like really zingy and punchy, and I love wheatgrass has that sweetness and then that kind of weird bittery kick, but I just always feel like much younger when I've had wheatgrass. And also it is, I do tell people it's a great hangover cure. When I was in my 20s, it was like I would come into the office after a night out and I would be bouncing off the walls and all perky, and they're like, what's wrong with you? And I would literally have wheatgrass shots before I came in, and it was like an eraser from a hangover eraser. I don't know if it works for everyone, but it used to work for me. So
it sounds like you're very in tune with, which is a great way to be, and with your body, and you listen to your body.
It's really important. Sometimes it takes a lot of listening to figure out problems. But because I've had issues with sleep off and on recently, and so I've cut like coffee and alcohol, and then I was sleeping like magic, and then I've had a few stressful days and I've been up. And I'm like, okay, stress is another ingredient you need to eradicate from your diet if you want to sleep well. And that's one that's harder because you don't consume it on purpose. And it gives you no pleasure when you consume it. And then it's quite hard sometimes. It just comes into your routine without that warning. But definitely don't put that on my shopping list.
No.
Exactly. But yeah, some of the recipes in the book do help. I mean, like lemon balm and lemon verbena and chamomile, and there are some soothing things that you can do to help. But one of the best things is actually to step away from your screen and to have that moment where is connected. Yeah, exactly. So it's the external process.
Yeah. And what about immune booster, which is probably a bit more relevant at this point with the COVID around?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I have a whole section on green juicing. So green juicing isn't always seen as immune boosting, but it's, it has, I mean, green, basically, I'd say if you're going to eat one color, eat green, because it just ticks all the boxes. If you have a health condition, if you eat something green, well, depending on what it is, if it's like a green vine gum, that's not going to help. But, green vegetables, especially deep leafy greens, you're going to be addressing a lot of things. But I mean, I have they're just turning into season, so the berries are out, but elderberries, they're really cute. They're on the cover, which I love. Quite nice. It's also quite British and foragey on the cover. That was actually, I didn't even pick the stuff on the cover, but they picked like some of my favorite things. But also elderflowers too. So I do it's in the new book I have coming out, the River Cottage Fermentation Handbook, but I've done a water kefir made with elderflower. And so it's actually a very much faster way of getting elderflower champagne, but it's alcohol. Well, actually, kefir does have like mild hints of alcohol because it is a fermented drink, and you do get a bit of alcohol the longer it ferments. But it's healthy probiotic elderflower fizz, much healthier than a sparkling cordial, or because the sugar is consumed by the kefir grains. So elderflower and elderflower tea, dried elderflower tea as well. Those are really good immune boosters. And I also have a whole palette. We shot it like a palette of ginger juices, like juice shots as well, and I've combined them with I've done some fun little flavors like beetroot, rhubarb and ginger shot, or cherry and ginger shot. So those are really great as well for boosting your immune system. And then any of the sort of anti-inflammatories too, like ginger, but also turmeric as well. And I've done some turmeric shots in the book as well, and various tonics featuring turmeric. And a turmeric latte is just it's a really nourishing way of comforting yourself, but also it's so energizing. So if you're kind of craving coffee 4 o'clock, if you're having a slump and later in the day, that's one of the best things to really give you a boost. I really get energized by turmeric actually, and I have a juice recipe in the book with carrot and turmeric, and it's just juiced carrot and turmeric, and it's really energizing. I'll have a shot of that, and then I feel like I've had an espresso, but I don't have the crash afterwards.
I'll have to give that a try. Yeah. I still haven't tried the turmeric latte, so I might have to do that as well.
Oh God, yeah, it's so lovely. Yeah, it's really nice. I've actually I have another recipe that I've evolved I did a book called Gifts from the Modern Larder, and so it's a powdered turmeric latte mix inspired by a friend of mine, Rebecca Sullivan, but she's put she loves roses, she's put rose petals in it. And so I put that, and it has cardamom, so it has a bit of a Moroccan vibe, and it's stunning. But a bit of dried rose, and rose is really like soothing and calming. It's really good for the heart, and it's a really sort of nourishing flavor.
That does sound yummy, actually. So rose petals you can just buy in powder, can you?
You can buy powdered, but I get them from, again, Neil's Yard. I don't work for them, so no plugging here and intentionally. But Neil's Yard Remedies sell really beautiful. They do the petals or the rose buds. Oh, wow. You can order them online as well, and most health food shops will have have them as well. But I've actually, at the moment, they're just starting to turn to hips, but you can pick wild dog rose petals. And it's the ones, they're open, so they're fully open, and you get 5 petals. So, and they're in the hedgerows, and you can get those and dry those. And I picked these ones, and they have the most incredible fragrance, especially when they dry. It intensifies because it takes out all the moisture. So you just get that, you're left with those essential oils in the rose petals. And yeah, I just dry them. So I've been getting free rose petals. I actually, the other day I picked some and I didn't have anything to put them in. And so I had my face mask. And so I put them in my face mask and then I went to wear my face mask the other day and I had all these roses. It was rose scented. It was the best.
How lovely.
So, yeah, it was great. So it was my little foraging basket. Yeah. It was amazing.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That is so good. You do quite a lot of foraging courses, don't you, as well?
Yeah,
I've attended one of them, and they're really good.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I think foraging is one of these things too that's nourishing. I use the word multi-layered a lot, but that it does nourish you sort of mentally. But when you consume foraged foods, and I always say this on the classes, is foraged foods are usually perennial, so they're foods that come back again, year after year. And what the benefit of that is that they have long tap roots, like long root systems, because when you grow an annual, it only has 3 to 12 months, and then you pick it because it's annual, so its cycle is 12 years maximum. 12 months maximum. And if you, brassicas are probably the easiest example, but the shortest. But I mean, if you pull a cabbage out of the ground, the root system on it's really tiny. And if you pull a perennial, like a wild food, if you try to dig, like if you've ever tried to dig up burdock, I've done that before. It takes, I did it, the first time I did it, there were 5 of us. We had a big, shovel, not a little hand spade, like a big proper shovel. And, you get these so the benefit of that is it's tapping into more nutrients, but also it's tapping into water systems that aren't available on the top. So if there's droughts, these plants can access water and so they're going to be the last man standing, if there's like an apocalypse that's like that not happen. But, in sort of climate crises, they're going to stand, or if there's flooding, they're going to have those root systems to be able to hold into the soil as, the topsoil gets eroded away. So they're really important that way, but also it's that mental aspect of connecting with nature. And I think especially in an urban environment, foraging is really important. And most people think they have to go to the woods or to the coastline. But literally, if I walked from my house to my local train station, which is just a 5-minute walk, I could easily pick a dozen things.
Well, we managed to make a whole meal when we did the course.
Yeah, no.
So I was so impressed how much. And it was in Angel, and there was so much stuff around.
No.
And I just had no idea.
It was fantastic.
Surprised.
I didn't do a recce either, so I was literally just seeing what I could find. So it was a bit
people though. I was just really had no idea.
Yeah, we found some cool stuff. I remember we found grapes, leaves, and we had wild plums, and it was great.
We had grapes on pizza. It was quite nice though.
Yeah, it was lovely. I have to do that route again.
Yeah. It was very successful. So you've got another book coming out in September, which we've spoke about already, the River Cottage Fermentation Handbook, which is getting released next month. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, next month, yeah. So I've had a pleasure of already having a look at it. It's very, very extensive. It's amazing. There's so much variety. Did you enjoy writing this book?
I loved it. Yeah. I mean, I love writing books. I think it's such a wonderful creative process. And to write something for River Cottage too is another layer of sort of privilege and joy, because the brief for writing that book was to be unashamedly British. And when they said that, I melted, because a lot of books are written for a global market, and that makes complete commercial sense. But it was, I've written it with dandelion, like I did a dandelion sort of kimchi recipe, and I've used damsons, and I've used elderflower, and a lot of things, wild garlic, and things that I normally, might be edited out of a book. And so I really focused, and a lot of the recipes were inspired by just being on the farm and picking vegetables. So I spent a lot of time we did a lot of shoot days, and some of the recipes were literally inspired by what was in the garden, which is the way it should be. And I've tried to write the book in a way that gives people a canvas. I say this for every book I've done, but you have a canvas so you know the theory and the basics. And I tried to do it in a really simple way that's easy to understand and gives people confidence to leap off the page, as it were, and go in their kitchen and use what they've got and use the ingredients and swap things out, and to be playful and creative and to take control of the, so they don't feel bound by the recipe, that they've been sort of almost freed by it.
You've definitely got a lot of variations. I mean, it's the really interesting combinations as well. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, it's so much fun. I love all of them. It's but I love, my favorite thing, I think, is the dandelion. Well, I call it crouchy because it's it has all the flavors of kimchi, like the chili, ginger, garlic, but it's made like a sauerkraut, which is a little bit faster in some ways. And it's just really great. And it's the fermentation process is so transformative. And for dandelion leaves, which can be quite bitter, especially if you're eating, you can eat quite a dense quantity of them in this recipe, but the bitterness is sort of completely softened, and it's really, really palatable with, the fermentation process. So, I mean, and it's that's a good tonic, that recipe, and it's a really good tonic for the liver, dandelion leaves. So yeah, it's amazing. I think fermentation is just so, I would say, wildly magical. This is wild, but it is just really fun, and I never get bored of really simple things like sourdough. And I've made, some people really freak out about sourdough, but I've actually made it really accessible too, where you can do stuff that doesn't involve like making whole loaf. You can make sourdough, different types of, like, I call them everyday sourdough recipes, but like pancakes and crumpets. And it's not just about making that perfect loaf that looks like the baker that's been making it for 20 years, but the recipe I have in the book is really, really good, though, I think, because it's taken me about 15 years to get my loaves looking good. And that's the recipe. And it was really shaped a lot by an amazing baker, Andy, at River Cottage, Andy Tyrrell. So he teaches the sourdough classes, and he really he just, there's those extra bits like folding the dough as it's proving, and adding the salt at half an hour after you've mixed the flour and the starter and the water. Those little tips actually make quite a big difference. I mean, these little tips I've woven through, and I do have to give Andy a lot of credit for them, because he really kind of polished my skills. I think people hopefully will have success, but I've given lots of warm-up recipes as well. If people are really keen to get into sourdough but really nervous about it, it's there's great stuff in there. So I'm really excited.
I saw the pancakes. I love the idea of the pancakes.
Yeah, they were great. Yeah, we shot that the day of lockdown started.
Oh, wow. Just got it in time.
We were on the edge.
I was going to say, there are 3 types of fermenting, aren't they? Which you explain very clearly in the book, which I thought that was very, very helpful.
Nice. So the main one that most people will be familiar with is lacto fermentation. So when you say the word lacto, people think dairy instantly, but it refers to lactic acid, which is present in dairy, but also it's present in a lot of ferment. So sourdough fits under lactic acid. All the sauerkrauts, the kimchis are lacto fermentation. The lacto refers to the lactobacillus as well. So they create the lactic acid during the fermentation process. And what that process is really simple. And I tried not to get like too sciencey in the book, just gave enough knowledge to really give you an understanding. So what happens is that the natural bacteria on the surface of the food, so be it in the flour, in the air, on the skin of the cabbage, you create an environment where they feed off the sugars, the natural sugars. So be it for flour, for sourdough, there's natural sugars in the flour, in the starches, so they're feeding off of that. In a sauerkraut, it's off the cabbage, so you're creating an environment where they feed off the natural sugars, and as they feed off of that, they produce the lactic acid, so that's the byproduct. So it turns the sugars into this lovely sort of soury, vinegary tang. So the other 2 types of fermentation is, the other one's ethanol, so that is alcohol. So that goes more into brewing, to making your cider. So I've done a really nice recipe that that crosses two of the methods, or two of the types of fermenting. So it's a homebrew cider, but then you can take that to acetic acid, which is the last one. So you create the ethanol in the alcohol. So basically the sugars convert to alcohol, to ethanol. And then when you expose that to air, then that ethanol and alcohol turns to acetic acid. And so I've done a homemade cider vinegar recipe. And actually, I just, that's one of my favorite things to make. And I make it with quince as well. And it's lovely. And it's a great way if you have crab apples near you, which, to be honest, because the weather's been so phenomenal, the apples are already, I was in an orchard I helped set up the other day, and the Bramley apples were pretty much ready to pick. The key, if you want to know, for picking apples, because I didn't pick them, but if you cradle the apple on the bottom and just give it a little twist, if it comes off, it's ready. And if it doesn't, if you're like tug of war, leave it, let it stay for a little bit longer. But apples, yeah, it's just really simple. You just make it with, you can make it with apple scraps. So I think I've called it apple scrap vinegar, or given that option of, if you're making a crumble and you have the cores and the peels, you can make a cider and turn it into vinegar, or have half cider and half, save some to make vinegar, or have just one or the other. But yeah, so that kind of covers those two. So it's lacto fermentation, ethanol, and acetic acid are the three types. And then the recipes in the book sort of go through and give you different examples of those and explain the processes.
Yeah. Why is it important to have fermentation in our diet, fermented foods?
Yes, the main thing is to keep our gut population, healthy. So once you sort of have a healthy gut health population, a healthy bacteria population in your gut, you can't just move on. You've done, it's not just a box you've ticked and then you can just eat loads of, whatever you want and don't think about it. It's something you constantly have to feed it. It's like watering a plant. So if you don't feed it, but it's not just even just watering it, it's also giving it the nutrients. So if you, grow something and it's in a pot and you water, but then after a while it starts to look sad, and it's because it's lacking in the nutrients. And it's the same thing. And also in the bacteria. I mean, I do a bit of gardening, and if you're adding, if you constantly top your soil up, I've done loads of geeky soil classes as well, but if you constantly top your soil up with compost, with fresh compost or manure, then you're actually adding the bacteria and yeast and that to feed the plants too. And you do get healthier crops. Also, in terms of keeping your gut population healthy, I've been to Laverstoke Park Farm in Hampshire, in Overton, and they have a soil lab there. And if you look at the soil of organic crops versus a conventional crop, the conventional crop, the soil is just, it's just soil. There's nothing, there's no life. It's really dead looking. Yeah. And if you look under the microscope at the organic soil, especially Jody Schechter's, which he's like, a complete soil geek, and I don't think he'll mind being called that, but it's teeming with life. It's like a good gut versus an unhealthy gut. One's a desert and one is a rainforest. Yeah. And a lot of people compare their gut flora to, a rainforest. And so when I was a child, even though I was eating all these amazing ferments my granny was making, and they were homemade, so they hadn't been pasteurized and there was no risk of that, but I still had I found out I had no good bacteria in my gut because I took lots of antibiotics as a child, and it was never properly redressed. I wasn't clearly eating enough of my granny's sauerkraut to boost the population. But there's an amazing woman called Sean at the Chuckling Goat. It's a kefir company in Wales, and she's a massive gut health expert. And she, I've learned a lot from her because I actually did a medicinal course of dairy kefir. So she has goats and she makes this beautiful goat's milk kefir. And I took that to repopulate my gut when I found out I had a desert basically. And she has this great metaphor for the guts, calling it like a rainforest. And she said, when you take, antibiotics, it's like pouring bleach down it, or it's like chopping the rainforest down. And so you have to rebuild that rainforest, and it takes a long time. And also you have to keep adding, feeding it to keep it alive. and vibrant. And so that's why, you know, fermented foods on the health level are so important. And we used to have them in our diets, you know, all the time, and they were homemade and they weren't pasteurized. And, you know, I, you know, don't like pointing a finger of blame at anyone, but I think, you know, the evolution of supermarkets as our main source of food has really taken that out of our culture, because, you know, to have stable shelf life is really important for the commercial and health and safety aspects of the supermarkets. And so, you know, that's eroded that culture. I will touch on just when I said health and safety, because I think that's a massive barrier and fear for people when they think about fermented foods. And they think, well, yeah, it's good for my gut, but if I make it homemade, am I going to like give myself food poisoning? And for fruit and vegetables, there are no recorded cases of food poisoning from fermented fruits and vegetables. So, you know, you'll know if it's not edible, because you won't be able to eat it. Like, it will be, unless you're really hardcore, but you'll know. So it's really safe way of preparing food, and doing it homemade is, you know, the benefit is that, you know, it's not pasteurized, and also you're creating it in your own environment. So you're incorporating your environment around you. And sometimes we might have irritations with our environment, and hay fever is a really good example. So you can liken making fermented foods in your own environment, or if you go abroad, if you find it hard, you know, if you find you get difficult digestion when you go abroad, that if you consume fermented foods, that it helps you acclimatize to the environment around you. And likening it to honey and the hay fever thing, it's very similar. So if you're consuming local honey that's, you know, from bees foraging on the local flora, then it's bringing something it's kind of like what's it called, a vaccination. Which is a very hot topic at the moment, but it's like a vaccination. So you're putting stuff that is irritating you a little bit into your system in this subtle way, mixed with all this other goodness, and it helps you to, you know, become immune to any sort of irritation from it. So that's the kind of analogy. I didn't put that in the book, actually, which is annoying, but it's a good special extra.
Yeah.
But, yeah, just kind of fully evolved that thinking. But
what's the difference? You sort of touched on this a bit. So making it at home versus buying something that's fermented in the shop, what would be the added bonus of that? Maybe, for example, some kombucha, and if you bought it in the shop versus you make it at home.
Yeah, I think kombucha is my favorite example. From my knowledge, a lot of kombucha is brewed with what's called back slop. So if you bought a bottle of kombucha from the supermarket or a shop, and you made some tea with the right ratio, 8.5%. So if you made like a liter of tea, I'm gonna give a quick recipe, a liter of tea with 85 grams of sugar in it. And then if you added a few tablespoons of kombucha from a bottle you bought in the shop, it will take longer to ferment, but you can make a kombucha that way. And that's probably quite a good way of, if you can't obtain a SCOBY, which is the culture you use to make kombucha, that is a cheats way, but it takes a bit longer and this is what's happening with the commercial brewed, because a SCOBY, I don't have one right next to me, so I won't do mine out of the kitchen, but some of them got neglected over lockdown because I was staying with my partner. But if you're brewing on a commercial scale, if you can imagine like big wine vats or, you know, beer tanks, and if you had a SCOBY in that, it would be, you know, what would you do with it? It would like literally be the size of a duvet, you know, a king size duvet. And so that's hard to manage. You know, what do you do with that sort of thing? And it will multiply as you brew. So they use the back slop, but that means that you're not getting as much contact and as big of a population of the bacteria and yeast added to your brew. So when you make it at home, it will quite often taste more sour than the commercial kombucha you get. And also a lot of kombucha is that you buy in the shops has added carbonation at the end. So they topped up the natural carbonation, and that's to control it in the bottle. Because if you make it at home and you leave it in the fridge for a couple of weeks and you open the door of the fridge and shake it about, it could explode. I mean, and I put various tips on how to avoid these problems and how to get around it. Corks is one of my tips. So if you put a cork in, it'll just pop out rather than a bottle exploding. And that's a much more sort of, laid back problem, a way of solving that problem. But yeah, so you're not getting as much. So I think I haven't actually analyzed it, but in sort of common sense, as if you're adding a big batch of good bacteria to something versus a few spoonfuls, then one is likely to have a much higher population. And also you get natural carbonation, and it can get really fizzy if you make it homemade. And I've talked through the process of achieving that, because a lot of people just ferment it and bottle it and drink it, or just ferment it and drink it, but there's another process, second fermentation, where you put it in the bottle and seal it, and then the sugars continue to get consumed by the good bacteria, and as they consume them, the byproduct of that is CO2. So you get the carbonation, so the gas basically that builds the bubbles up. So when you stop the airflow, then that builds up and gives you really lovely fizz, and it can be like champagne. You can make a kefir, water kefir, with a serious amount of fizz in 3 days. And you can make a kombucha in 1 to 2 weeks, and you've made a homemade drink that is something that you can buy. You save a lot of money making it your own as well. So I think there's a multi-layer sort of realm of benefits to making your own.
Yeah. So what are some common mistakes when fermenting?
So one common mistake is with kombucha, for instance. Kombucha, some things like to have air exposure, some don't, and some things go in the fridge and some things don't. So with kombucha, when you have this SCOBY, I wish I had it to hand. People will put it in the fridge, and I actually did that. I don't have it to hand. I'm just trying to see. I have something really funny, and I made the mistake myself. So my friend Sarah, she's Swedish and an amazing fermenter and forager and an amazing human being all around. And she gave me my first kombucha SCOBY. I was lazy and I just put it in the fridge, and you're not supposed to. So kombucha SCOBYs like air, and they don't like to be cold. And so I had this one in the fridge, and then my friend was doing a book shoot, and she asked me to help do the food styling, and I did. And I said, great, I can use my kombucha SCOBY, and I brought it, and we took it's an amazing photograph of it. It's really stunning, but the SCOBY is on the bottom of the jar. And so a kombucha SCOBY, when it's alive, it likes to float. I mean, sometimes it kind of will move through the jar a little bit like that, or when you first put it in, it'll like sort of sit along the bottom, but then it will rise to the top as it's fermenting. And if you ever have a kombucha SCOBY that's on the bottom after like a week, it's most likely it hasn't survived. It's not happy. And this kombucha in this beautiful photograph is totally dead. The SCOBY is completely dead. I always tell people that story because I think it's quite good to be open about your mistakes, because I mean, that's how you learn, to be honest. So I think it's really important to make mistakes. So I always say, if you want to get found, you have to get lost first. So, but it's true. If you always have to make some mistakes, and you learn from them, and then you don't forget what works. Just to give one more example, because I could go through a whole day's worth, but one other really common, I wouldn't say it's a mistake, but I find to have really successful sourdough is to actually do the opposite and store the starter in the fridge. And I usually have this is just a water glass, but I usually have a jar, like a jam jar about this size, and I have usually about this much, so I don't know if you can see, but about this much starter in it. So I only have about four tablespoons of starter in my jar, and I do keep it in the fridge. And I made a loaf earlier this week. I'd actually left my starter in the fridge for about 5 weeks because I was really busy and didn't get around to making it. And I took it out, and it had a bit of gray sort of liquid on the top, and it looked a bit sad underneath that, and I just scraped that off, and then I had this lovely starter that looked like a nice mix of flour and water. It wasn't that bubbly, it was quite a dense paste. It looked a bit like wallpaper sort of plaster, and I sort of activated it, which I go through in the book, but it's just adding flour and water in equal portions, and so every time I do that, so today I need to probably make a new loaf. So what I'll do is take my little jar out of the fridge, and I'll spoon the whole thing into a bowl, and then I'll add equal amounts of flour and water, mix that all up. And then what I'll do is take a few more spoonfuls of that and put back, I'll clean my jar just to keep it fresh, And then I'll put that back into my jar, and then I put that in the fridge. And that's how I manage my starter. But a lot of people will get, this is just my water jug, but they'll have they'll say this is like a Kilner jar, like a liter of Kilner jar. And people will have a starter, and then they feed it, and then they leave it, and then they keep adding to it. They'll use some of it, but they just keep adding to it at room temperature. Yeah. And what happens when it's at room temperature is when the bacteria and yeast are active and they're feeding off of those sugars in the sort of, from the flour and the starches in the flour. And once they've stopped feeding, that's when they basically, they run out of food, and then the bacteria and yeast start dying off. And that's where you get that gray liquid sludge. It's basically dead yeast on the top. And so if you constantly have your starter at room temperature, you have to feed it all the time, and that can produce waste if you're not using it all the time. But also it can make your starter go a bit sour, and also just be a bit less active, because they're constantly working, they're constantly feeding, and they constantly need to be fed, and they're exhausted. So I always let mine have a sleep in the fridge, and it's really transformed, because I've had a lot of loaves where you fold it and make it, you spend all this time nurturing it, and half a bag of flour, and all this time you get excited and you turn it out, from a bowl or a banneton, the wicker sort of baskets, that bamboo baskets you use to shape it, and the loaf just falls, or it falls once you put it in the oven, and it's still edible, but it's more like a focaccia than a beautiful rounded loaf. So that's my tip. It's don't store the kombucha SCOBY in the fridge, but do store your sourdough starter in the fridge. And I do put those tips throughout, and most of them are gleaned from me making mistakes. So hopefully, or other people. I get actually my Instagram private messaging is, and you're welcome, anyone watching this, you do message me. I try to get back. Sometimes I get flooded and it takes a while, but I do have moments. If I have an hour to spare, I'll just go through and answer them, because I find it really fascinating where people get stuck. And it's great when I can help, because I've been stuck before too. And it's really nice when people are generous with their knowledge. And I always learn from it. You learn where people make mistakes, or sometimes people do things you never knew could happen. You're like, wow, I haven't heard that one. But no one should ever feel bad if they they come to someone and they've never experienced that that sort of teaching at all, because it's a live thing, it's nature, and things happen that and that's what makes it exciting. They might be onto something completely new and wonderful. So be brave. Exactly, be brave. I think confident is the main thing, is be confident.
Just get started.
Exactly, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm very excited about your book coming out. When does it really get released? In September?
The 3rd of September.
3rd of September. You can pre-order it now, can't you?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. So you'll get it on the day, hopefully, if you pre-order. So
Great. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Our pleasure. No, thank you.
I've got excited now. I'm going to go off and do some fermenting of my own.
Me too. I'm going to go bottle my kombucha and have it later.